Konnichiwa minasan, and welcome back to Shogun History. Today we examine the juxtaposition of a somewhat feel-good family musical against its much more macabre, and certainly by modern standards, cruel, true history from which it is based upon. This is the telling of the life of Phineas Taylor Barnum, a man who garnered fame and infamy for his so-called curiosities at his museum and circus. The true story will have you questioning your support for the loving character Hugh Jackman depicts, so keep watching as we uncover the shrouded facts behind the spectacle that was the so-called greatest show on earth. Born in 1810, the early life of P.T. Barnum presented in the movie is far removed from reality. He was not the poor son of a tailor that scrounged for food on the streets, nor did he know his future wife at this young age. The movie portrays him as a romantic dreamer with ambitions to secure a luxurious life for his family. In reality, Barnum was not much of a romantic. A born entrepreneur, Barnum, seeing an opportunity while he worked as an assistant in a general store, began a lottery that became rather successful, earning enough to purchase his own store. Impassioned by politics, he began writing articles and submitting them to local newspapers, all of which were rejected. Because of this, he decided to self-publish and founded his own newspaper, named the Freedom Herald. Herein, he published an article exposing the corrupt leaders of the local church, which landed him in a libel case. Having no proof to provide in court, he was ordered to pay a fine of $100 and spent 60 days in jail. Upon his release, he was heralded by the townspeople as a local hero, and it's here he got his first taste of notoriety, a hunger that would follow him for the rest of his life. Barnum moved to New York in 1834, believing he would find more opportunities for fame, and of course, fortune. The movie does a poor job of establishing his real motives. It seems because he was once offered the kindness of an apple by a physically deformed lady, he randomly decides to champion the unfortunate and finance a museum. It doesn't add up to me, but okay movie. In reality, having set himself up in a modest financial situation with his entrepreneurial acumen, he now saw any scheme he could cash in on. This is where the real story begins to turn really dark. When he was 25, he met a man who introduced him to an African-American slave woman by the name of Joyce Heth. Heth claimed that she was once the nanny to previous American President George Washington, and would regale endless stories of her imagined life. At the time, this would have made Joyce about 161 years old, and although appearing incredibly old, she was actually in her 80s. Dollar signs rang through Barnum's mind, and he offered Joyce's owner $1,000 in order to put her on display. Oh, it gets worse. People came from all over the city to see Joyce, who Barnum had marketed as the world's oldest woman. But in order to further substantiate his claim, he had Joyce's teeth pulled out, disfiguring her face, and I'm sure providing great discomfort. Joyce Heth would unfortunately die less than a year after she was purchased by Barnum. Speaking on her death, Barnum said, "I shed tears upon her humble grave, not of sorrow for her decease, but of regret on the account of losing a valuable and profitable curiosity." What a f***ing This experience is what proved to Barnum that people will pay to see something they have never seen before. By showcasing human spectacles and marketing them as so-called curiosities, he could simply have them perform and cash in on the ticket sales. To pull this off, Barnum utilised his marketing genius to establish a sense of curiosity in the public. He did this by creating elaborate hoaxes, one famous one being the Fiji mermaid, claiming it to be the corpse of a mermaid caught by fishermen. In reality, it was the body of a fish sewn to the upper torso of an adolescent monkey. God only knows where he procured these animal parts. It's this next part of Barnum's career that divides people's opinion. He established a freak show to exploit people with physical abnormalities, displaying them for the public to gawk at. These types of exhibits had seen popularity throughout Europe in the last 2 centuries, and while public opinion was beginning to sway against these types of shows, they still proved to be very popular. It is said, however, that Barnum would pay his performers very handsomely, providing them with jobs they may not have been able to get outside of his show. He's also said to have treated them like family. The film leans into this enormously, portraying Barnum as some kind of saviour and a man ahead of his time, and it's simply not the case. Barnum was motivated by money, and despite paying these disadvantaged people, I can't reconcile this to accept this form of exploitation. I couldn't see past this in the movie. It seems to me they are painting the picture of a man with 21st century ideals of acceptance and seeing the beauty where others can't. His performers seem to love him, and while this may or may not have been the case, in reality, none of his motives were about helping people. It was all to sell tickets. Always looking for the next big thing, Barnum met one of his distant cousins, a young boy named Charles Stratton, who was a proportional dwarf, meaning that he would stay the size of a toddler for his whole life. In the movie, he meets him as a 22-year-old man, but actually he was recruited when he was just 4 years old. The family, being afraid for their son's future due to most dwarves in the 19th century having a difficult time finding employment outside of the entertainment industry, where they were basically used as the butt of a joke, P.T. Barnum convinced them to allow him to be his cousin's manager, teaching him how to sing, dance, and act. He gave him the stage name of Tom Thumb, after the much beloved fairy tale of the same name, and would dress him in 4-piece suits, or as historical figures such as Napoleon. This act was wildly successful, selling out shows across Europe and America, making Charles Stratton one of the world's first global stars. It is true that even Queen Victoria was a fan of Little Tom Thumb, although the meeting did not at all happen like in the movie.
You're even smaller than I imagined.
Well, you're not exactly reaching the top shelf yourself, sweetheart.
Ugh, seriously, movie? Barnum then hired other proportional dwarves, one of which would become the wife of Tom Thumb. This act was so popular that unbelievably, the then President Abraham Lincoln threw the 2 dwarves a honeymoon party in the White House. At this point, Barnum's Museum of Curiosities was often so popular and crowded that he needed a way to force people to leave. Barnum's cunning led him to put up a sign stating, "This way to the egress." People thought it was another attraction, but egress is simply a fancy word for exit. Once outside, they could not return and would need to wait in line to purchase another ticket if they wanted to get back in. Yeah, he's an asshole, but a marketing genius. There are a few other characters in the movie based on real people. The bearded lady, whose real name was Annie Jones, but for some reason is renamed Letty Lutz in the film. Originally she was recruited by Barnum, and this is truly unbelievable, at 9 months old. Having sideburns and a moustache, she was first referred to as the bearded child, and as she grew, the bearded girl, before finally becoming the bearded lady. The tattooed man in the film was George Constantinos, a Greek Albanian who claimed to have been held prisoner for a rebellion against the King of Burma, and as a punishment was tattooed head to toe, which took over 3 months. It's unknown if this backstory is true, but experts have confirmed that the tattoos over his body were authentic examples of traditional Burmese tattooing. Other real people at Barnum's circus include the man rather cruelly known as the dog-faced boy, and the supposed fattest man of the time, Charles Morland. I mean, he looks fat here obviously, but we've all seen pictures of fatter people in Walmart, right? Ugh, how times have changed. As seen in the movie, not everyone was a fan of Barnum's sideshow. Many people considered these types of attractions dens of sin, and the oddities and performers being showcased there fueled public outrage. While it is true that the museum did burn down in 1865, the origin is unknown. However, Barnum's pro-unionist stance and acknowledgement in his lectures and exhibits had most likely spurred Confederate loyalists to commit the arson. After the fire, a new museum was opened at a different location, which happened to also burn down, and like we see in the movie, this led him to enter the circus business. Barnum's eager young protege in the film, Philip Carlyle, played by Zac Efron, is completely fictitious. I believe this character was created purely for the subplot of the interracial love story between himself and trapeze artist Anne Wheeler, who is also a fictional character. Such romances in that period of time would have been deeply frowned upon. On the subject of Zac Efron's character, there is a scene in which he drinks hard liquor with him while trying to convince him to join his show. The real P.T. Barnum, by the time of his museum success, did not partake in alcohol. In fact, he was a staunch prohibition advocate and wrote many articles in support of abstinence. He refused to sell alcohol at his museum and circus, only offering icy water. Such places would have been expected to sell liquor at the time. He was even pushed to run for president on the prohibition ticket, although did not follow through with this. Jenny Lind, the Swedish opera singer, is a real person, and it's true that she toured with Barnum, who gave her the name the Swedish Nightingale. He spent most of his fortune bringing her over to America for the tour. She earned $350,000 in profit, which is roughly about $10 million adjusted to today's inflation. However, she would give almost every penny to charity, most notably to free schools in Sweden. The part of this story that isn't true is the romantic feelings that were present between them in the movie, and that was certainly not the reason she quit the tour. I think they did a severe disservice to Jenny Lind by establishing this. There is no evidence of any romantic interaction between them. With all her philanthropy, it's so unfair to paint her simply as a woman scorned. Barnum was a man known for many things, but not cheating on his wife. The real reason she left the tour was because she was uncomfortable with Barnum's relentless marketing schemes and felt she wasn't correctly being represented. Barnum's circus continued operation for 147 uninterrupted years. Due to dwindling attendance and high operating costs, it was forced to close its doors, ironically months before the premiere of this film. It had been plagued with many controversies in the years prior, due to criticisms of animal abuse and exploitation, many of which are completely substantiated. I haven't touched on the animal abuses much in this review, but for one thing, elephants don't deserve to be performing in New York. They should be free in their natural habitat. And this is another reason why this film severely disappointed me, as it seems to glorify this exploitation of animals. Hugh Jackman riding one down the streets of New York is frankly ridiculous. Ugh, shut up, movie. Let's make one thing clear. Making a feel-good musical about P.T. Barnum was a really bad idea. This isn't to say that making a musical about the circus is doomed to failure. On the contrary, the theatrics and suspension of disbelief inherent in live performative arts would make the circus spectacle a near ideal setting for a musical. But to make P.T. Barnum the centerpiece of such a film is simply gaudy and crass. Aside from some catchy show tunes and dance performances, there exists nothing but Barnum's weak arc about overcoming his insecurities and a set of one-dimensional characters with no real substance. Animal cruelty, slavery, exploitation, child labor, so many reasons to hate this man. While yes, I understand the filmmakers wanted to create a heartwarming musical and not the harsh reality, I simply cannot understand why they needed to base this on P.T. Barnum. They have immortalized someone no one should be looking up to, printing the legend of a good man, which P.T. Barnum was far from. They've already made up his whole backstory, so why not just change his name as well, instead of giving this awful human being some credit, which is genuinely not deserved. I do have to admit, I'm not a fan of musicals, but I am of history, and to market this movie as based on a true story is a severe disservice to the people and animals he harmed for his own fame and fortune. I can 100% understand this divide on audience and critic score. While on one hand, for musical lovers, this is obviously an entertaining ride, I even have to admit that I shamefully found myself enjoying the ballads as I watched the film for my research. On the other side, A serious look at P.T. Barnum's life requires acknowledgement of the ways in which his success manifested. In my opinion, The Greatest Showman is therefore just as much of a fraud as he was. Minasan, for the first time so far in Shogun history, this film has not pleased the Shogun. While trying to be as unbiased as possible, and maybe because I guiltily enjoyed the music a little bit, for entertainment value, I am forced to give today's film a 4 out of 10. On the other hand, for its sheer disregard for history, and for celebrating a man who built his name through exploitation and labour of the disabled, as well as the abuse of animals for the sake of grotesque amusement, for historical accuracy, it gives me great pleasure to give The Greatest Showman 0 out of 10, putting it at the very bottom of the Shogun rankings with 20%. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out my other videos on screen now, and if you enjoyed today, please help the Shogun expand his empire by liking and subscribing. じゃあ皆さん、次回も楽しみにしてね。気をつけてね。さようなら。